Here in Brussels today making the case for Scotland and the UK remaining part of the European Union. Yes, there is a case for reform. I want to see a European Union that doesn't interfere in matters that are best left to the discretion of national governments. I want to see more proportionate regulation and more democracy and transparency. But fundamentally, I believe that Scotland and the UK's best interests are served by being a member of the European Union. Jobs depend on it, investment depends on it, the diversity of our country and the sense of who we are, I think, depends on it, and that's the positive case I'll be making. The UK is not a unitary state, it's a multinational state, and I think it would be wrong for any one member of that multinational family of nations to be taken out of the European Union against its will. So I will argue for what's called a double majority rule that would mean that the UK could only come out of the European Union if each of England, Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland voted to do so. I think that's fair and democratic.
A challenge to David, to Ed and to Nick tonight. They spent a lot of time in Scotland during the Scottish referendum talking about the UK family of nations. So will they give a commitment that if there is an in-out referendum, no one part of that family of nations will be taken out of Europe against its will? Will they give a commitment, as Leanne has suggested, that the votes will be counted in each of the four nations so that none of us can be dragged out against our will?
First of all, about something a referendum we know we're going to have, which is the in-out referendum on European Union membership. How will that change the dynamic of politics in Scotland?
Well, obviously, it depends on the outcome of it. I will be passionately arguing in that referendum that not just Scotland, but the UK should opt to stay within the European Union, not because I think it's perfect, I don't. I think there's many aspects of it that are ripe for reform, but I think our interests are best served by being within. If we end up in the scenario, which might not happen, but it is certainly not beyond the bounds of possibility, that the UK as a whole voted to come out of the European Union, but Scotland voted to stay in, I think that would undoubtedly have people in Scotland demanding that we look again at whether we should be independent.
The independence proposition very different, wouldn't it? Because then there really would be a border.
It would also make the staying in the UK proposition very different as well. Now, I'm not sitting here saying I think it would make a vote for independence guaranteed or inevitable. I'm sure there would be a variety of different opinions at that time. What I am saying, though, is I think it would. Now, maybe I'm wrong, but I think it would have many people saying that that is an option we should at least look at again. Incidentally, I've put forward a proposal that would take away the possibility of this scenario arising, this idea that many federal states, and I know we're not a federal country in the UK, but nevertheless an idea that many federal states embrace of double majority, so that for a UK exit, for a Brexit, there would have to be not just a vote across the entirety of the UK, but a vote for that in each of the component nations of the UK. Because we were told repeatedly during the referendum that the UK is a family of equal nations. Now, if that's true, then here's a chance to prove it.
But in the event of a British exit in which Scotland votes to stay in, you have to change your independence case, don't you? Because you're asking the Scots to choose between two unions then. And it makes the argument for a shared currency with the rest of the UK radically different, doesn't it? It's inconceivable, isn't it, that a Scotland that's inside the EU could share a currency with a state that was outside it?
I don't think it's inconceivable, but I do accept that many of those debates would have a different dynamic to them. And that is undoubtedly the case for those who would be arguing for independence, but it would also change the proposition pretty dramatically for those who are arguing for the Scotland to stay within the UK. I'm trying to get at how what your thinking is about the way you will have to change your pitch. I'm not. Let me emphasise this point. I'm not hoping necessarily that this scenario comes about. I'm going to spend a lot of time over the next couple of years arguing very strongly for the UK as a whole to vote to stay in the European Union. I've put forward a proposal that would take away the possibility of this scenario arising. Because maybe this is one of my faults. I'm not one of these constantly Machiavellian sort of type politicians that is always trying to engineer certain scenarios that suit my political purposes, even if I think they're bad for the country. Frequently asked me two questions about the EU referendum. The first is, how can you support independence and back Scotland's membership of the EU? Well, the answer to that is simple. I believe that independent countries must cooperate to tackle common challenges. Every member of the EU is an independent country working with others for the greater good. Brexit vote will mean a second independence referendum. Well, here's what the SNP manifesto at the recent election said about that. The Scottish Parliament should have the right to hold another referendum if there is a significant and material change in the circumstances that prevailed in 2014, such as Scotland being taken out of the European Union against our will. Clear that if Scotland does indeed face that prospect of being taken out of Europe against our will, then that option is on the table. But to be clear, that situation only arises if Scotland votes Remain next week. But to be clear, that situation only arises if Scotland votes Remain next week. If Scotland votes to leave, then that premise for independence doesn't arise. If votes to leave, then that premise for independence doesn't arise. One of these constantly, Machiavellian sort of type politicians that, is always trying to engineer certain scenarios that suit my political purposes, even if you're basing your decision on what it means for independence, let me be very, very clear. The only sensible and logical vote is one for Scotland to remain in Europe. If Scotland votes to leave, then our immediate future will be one inside the UK but outside the EU, at the mercy of a Tory government led by the likes of Boris Johnson, which is even more right-wing than that of David Cameron and George Osborne. So I ask you to vote Remain on Thursday because it is in Scotland's best interest. Maybe this is one of my faults. I'm not one of these constantly, Machiavellian sort of type politicians that, is always trying to engineer certain scenarios that suit my political purposes, even if I think they're bad.